everyone, welcome to today's class, video, whatever. So today we have a lot of tomatoes from Food Forward, Social Justice Learning Center. They're beautiful and some of them are a little mushy. So mushy tomatoes are no big deal. When they're not broken, when the skin isn't broken and it doesn't look like there's been a bug or some other visitor in your tomato, you can totally use them. And today we're going to use them making homemade tomato sauce. So we have a few, well, we're going to do two different types. We're going to do one in the pan or at a pot, and we're going to simmer it and reduce it down to a nice, like saucy, something that's a little smooth that you would put over like pasta or anything. And then we're going to saute some tomatoes with fresh garlic in a pan and just put them over pasta, because there's multiple ways that you can use tomatoes. And of course, as I've said before, tomatoes are amazing. They have vitamin C, lycopene, they have so many beautiful vitamins and nutrients. So they're definitely something to add to your diet. Help lower blood sugar, everything. Cholesterol, there's so many things you can do with them. So before we get started, I'm just going to cook the pasta. We got this in our pantry. You can cook pasta in a few different ways. You can break it in half if you don't like it long, or you can just put it right in the pot. Today I've already boiled some water, and before the water was boiling, I added salt, because I add salt to all of my spaghetti and all of my rices. Adding salt first in the water allows the salt to infuse into the grains or really anything you're cooking and flavor it, and that way you don't need to add a ton at the end. Sometimes when you don't salt something while it's cooking, you can't actually ever like add the salt back. So this said, I've added the salt to cold water and then brought it to a boil. Just a note for all of you guys at home, I don't know if you've tried this, but if you add salt to boiling water, you will get an explosion of hot water in your face. So do not do that. I'm going to put this in, and with a spoon, I'll just stir it in until it's all mixed up in there. So we'll come back to that. I'm going to let that settle in. Okay, so today I've cut up a whole bunch of tomatoes, and what I did is I basically just, with a knife, I took off the end and I cut them into, these are very mushy tomatoes, so I cut them into quarters, and that's all I did. And this way, if you're leaving the skins on and the seeds when you cook tomato sauce, which is what I'm doing, it has a possibility of being a little more bitter than sauce that you've taken the seeds out and the skin off. Let me just check the pasta. Great. So this said, an amazing way to do tomato sauce is to take out the seeds, take off the skin. You take off the skin first, and I'm just going to show you quickly one tomato and how to take the skin off of a tomato. So if you don't have time and you want to make a tomato sauce that you want to keep for a week or two in the refrigerator, you can chop up tomatoes very easily and make your sauce, reduce it, and then we will strain it to strain out the skin and the seeds later and make a very smooth sauce. But if you wanted to do it like a professional chef and be fancy, this is how you start. So with a clean tomato, we're going to take the end, not the part where the stem came from, but the end, and we're going to make a small X at the bottom. Once you've broken, you don't need to break like all the way through, just the skin. Once you've broken the skin, we're going to put it in boiling water, and of course you can do this with like 10 tomatoes at once. We'll put it in boiling water for about 30 seconds. Just like that. And once that's done, we'll take it out, and then I'll show you how easily you can peel the tomato, and then furthering, you can de-seed it, and then we'll put it in the pot and we'll just go from there. So I'm going to take it out. First I'm going to stir up the pasta. So I think that's not quite ready. So instead, we'll start cutting the onion for the sauce. Or pretty much as soon as I'm done doing this, I'll take it out. Okay. So, I have a tomato. So what I did, I made the X, and now all I have to do is peel it. Actually, this tomato is pretty tight. Like the skin is pretty tight on the tomato, and it's not like working as easily as that should. I thought this would be way more impressive for you guys, but it's a fumble. But that's okay. If you guys don't do this like perfectly at home, you know that you're in good company, because I just did it like kind of okay on video. So basically the skin does peel right off though. So you would just continue to peel the skin, and if you leave them in for too long, the tomato gets really mushy and hard to handle, and also the longer you leave them in, the hotter the tomato gets, and you want to do this when the tomatoes are warm, so the skin stays soft enough to peel off. So if you do this and then you let them cool down, the skin might not be as easy to take off. So that said, here's the tomato. I peeled off all the skin, and then it's like really easy to cut. And you can just cut it in half. And you can take a knife, you can just cut it like this. So then we have like a little piece of a tomato. And so this technically is a great way to make delicious sauce. You don't need to really add that much sugar. It tastes a lot less bitter than tomatoes can taste when you are keeping the skin on and cooking it. And you don't have to strain it at the end. It can be chunky and smooth. It's really wonderful, but it's very time consuming. And so in the interest of saving time and to prove that cooking doesn't have to be fancy to be good, we're just gonna do it my way. But I'm gonna chop these up and use these anyway. Okay, so that said, let's get the sauce ready. I'm gonna take an onion, and I think we'll use the whole onion. I like to really flavor my sauce, because honestly, you can add things like basil or oregano or all kinds of things like that, but you don't have to. Tomatoes, onions, garlic, salt, and like maybe a little pepper is a delicious sauce, and you really don't need that much more to make a sauce good. So I'm going to chop the entire onion, and I'm going to just cut it once lengthwise and then make some slices. So as this tomato sauce reduces and cooks, the whole thing, those tomatoes will probably take an hour and maybe like an hour and 15 minutes, maybe a little less, to reduce down. The onions will reduce down as well, and a lot of the time the onions sort of just like evaporate into like onion mush, and you don't even see them anymore. If you wanted bigger pieces and chunky onions in your sauce, you could make them a lot bigger. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to take this pan and I'll saute the onions in olive oil for about 5 minutes, and then we'll add the tomatoes. So I'll meet you over at the stove. Okay, we're at the stove. I got a little ahead of myself because I said that I was going to saute the onions without you, and I would never leave you behind. Let's do it together. So I'm gonna put in, I already did put a little bit of oil in this pot, but I'm going to put in about 1/2 cup of oil, and once it's heated up, which it is, I'm going to add the onions. Now you don't want to fry the onions, this is a little too hot. You just want to saute them a little bit. And I'll add a little salt. And then, you know, I didn't get it before, so I'm gonna have to go get some sugar because we need a tablespoon of that. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. The power of editing. I went to go get my sugar. It's right here. So I am going to put a tablespoon of sugar in here. Sugar is actually a really important part when you're making sauce that's going to be condensed down. It just adds a little bit of like sweetness to the tomatoes, of what like you would expect a tomato to taste like in the summer. Sugar kind of gives that to the tomatoes. And then I'm going to add I think I chopped up about 8 cloves of garlic, and I'm going to add about 6 cloves to the sauce. The nice thing about making homemade pasta sauce is it's not really a set it and forget it, because you do have to go back and stir constantly, and you have to give your sauce some attention. But once this part is done, it's basically like make sure it doesn't burn, stir it often, let it boil down to the right texture that you want, and it's done. So you don't need to check it too often. Now, once that's all together and it looks really good and it smells amazing, I'm just going to add the tomatoes. Simply like this. And then I'll stir this up, and I'm going to bring this to a simmer on medium heat, and we'll let it sit. So right now they're chunks. These are going to soften up, boil down, and get really mushy. Sort of like making jam. You start with raspberries and you end up with mush. So there we go. I'm gonna actually switch stoves. And the spaghetti is done, so I'm going to put that aside. And then let's drain the spaghetti and let's get started on the pan sauce. Okay, so I'm gonna drain this and I'll be right back. For those of you who have never drained spaghetti, I have a colander, which is, let me just grab it. This is a colander. I got this one at IKEA. It's really great. It has holes in it. It has a little lip so the food doesn't touch the bottom of the sink. You place this in your sink, and when you pour anything out that's hot, you want to pour it away from you. If you pour it towards you, the steam can come up and you can get a steam burn. So with that said, I'm going to drain the pasta and I'll be right back. Okay, so I drained the spaghetti and I put it back in the pan. I like to put the spaghetti that whenever I cook it in, I like to dump it right back in. And if I'm not cooking it, or if I'm not eating it right away, I'll just add a little bit of olive oil to prevent it from sticking together in big clumps, although that can kind of be fun to eat. Sometimes people don't want really clumpy spaghetti, so I'm just gonna add a little bit of olive oil to get it all loosen, and then I'm going to put the lid on and set it aside. And it will still be warm when we come back to it, because this doesn't take very long. I'm going to take a pan and add a little bit of oil. So whatever oil you use in here will be the oil that basically like creates your sauce and coats your pasta. So if you like a lot of oil, you can put a lot in. If you don't, put a little. And I'm also going to take another pan and saute some asparagus. So in this pan, I'm just gonna add a little bit of oil to get the asparagus, you know, not burning, and that's over there. And once this is hot, all I'm going to do is put in the tomatoes. So I'm not sure if you guys can see this, but the bottom of the sauce is starting to boil, the one in the pan, and it's releasing a lot of juice, so it's doing its job. Nothing really needs to happen there. And the tomatoes are starting to sizzle. I'll add a little bit of salt. I won't add, you know what? I could add probably a little bit of sugar, but I'm not going to. I'm just gonna add a little bit of salt, and I'll add the rest of the garlic, which is about 3 cloves. And then in the other pan, I cut off 2 inches of the end of the stalk of asparagus, and I'll just cook that much. So I know I go over this a lot, but this is cast iron, so I'm using metal directly on the surface. This is not. So even though I will be like moving this around, I'm not scratching the bottom of this pan at all. This pan, since it's cast iron, it's not a health hazard to do so. But you do need to be careful with anything that's non-stick that you're not scratching the bottom off. I know I've said this in other videos, but it is really important. So that's pretty much as we're gonna do. So the pasta's ready. This sauce is cooking. This will be... Okay, so we're almost done cooking the asparagus. It doesn't really take that long to cook asparagus in a pan or on the grill. It's actually a really thin vegetable and it cooks easily. I did add salt, and so I will just add a little bit of pepper. Now for those of you who have a huge thing like this at home too, I'm gonna actually put some in my hand first and then I'll pour it in. Or I'll sprinkle it over. Maybe I'll just add the rest to this. I'm gonna turn this down. This sauce is ready. I basically did nothing. I mean, we added olive oil, salt, garlic, a little pepper, and the tomatoes, and it's good to go. So you don't need to do something complicated like a homemade sauce, but you can make a fresh tomato sauce anytime. These are browning nicely. These look tasty. I think we are ready to plate. So this took about 3 minutes to cook, and the asparagus took about 5 minutes to cook. So let's go over to the table and let's plate it up. Okay, so we're back on this side. I took the pasta off of the stove. It's still steaming hot. It's really easy to separate because we added the oil. Before I finished the sauce, I turned it off and then I realized that I wanted to have protein, and so I'm sorry I left you guys out of that part, but I did just add just a can of white chicken to the sauce just to add a little bit of protein. All I did was I opened the can, I drained it of water, and I basically just put it in there and stirred it up and just let it heat up a little bit. So that addition is not on film, so I'm sorry. But I'm adding some pasta sauce now, and you'll see what it looks like. So I have the sauce, and as you can see, I added the chicken. You could also put this in the pan and toss this, but this is easy enough. And then we'll add some asparagus. And we've made a pretty fast meal. Spaghetti, fresh pasta sauce on the stove with some chicken and asparagus. I hope you guys enjoy it, and we'll get back to the sauce on the stove now. Okay, so this pasta sauce has been brought to a boil. Remember, I didn't add any water, but the tomatoes are releasing their own juices and they are doing a good job of boiling down. We don't want to keep this at a boil because it does have a tendency to burn. So we'll just turn it down a little bit, just to a simmer, and at this point we're going to stir it about every 10 minutes just to make sure it's not burning, and we'll keep doing this, and probably in about an hour it will be done. Alright, so at this point we're really boiling. This stove is pretty powerful, so it's hard to get a simmer, but this is the max you would want pasta sauce to be cooking at, and it's been about 30 minutes now, and the tomatoes are getting softer, and because I didn't peel them, I'm just going to sort of like smash the sides. I like to do this because once I strain them, we're going to be taking out all of the skin and the seeds that are left over. But at this point, the more you smash them sooner, the more that water is released and that it has an opportunity to condense down. Because ultimately, we started out with, I didn't even count, it was about 20 tomatoes, maybe 2 pounds, and this is going to reduce to 1/3 of its size. If you start with something up here, you basically want to end it like underneath where the line is now. So, and you'll be able to tell, it's not like when you make jam, how it still looks liquidy when you're cooking it. And then in the fridge, it like finally solidifies and gets, you know, nice and hard. This pasta sauce will sort of look the way it's supposed to look once it's ready. So you'll be able to tell, like clearly right now, it's really liquidy. There's a lot of pieces that are separated, and so it's not ready. So that's been 30 minutes. We'll wait, we'll just keep stirring it, and we'll come back in a little bit. Okay, so it's been about 35 to 40 minutes, and so once this starts to really reduce, you're going to see a lot of liquid appear. This is totally normal, just keep going. And again, every time I stir, I'm sort of pressing the sides to separate the meat of the tomato from the skin. So totally normal. Make sure you stir all the way around the bottom to make sure that nothing's burning in a little clump down there, and we'll be back. Okay, so I think this is ready. As you see, there's a lot of places where it's looking thick, it's looking yummy. This will thicken up a little bit in the fridge. This is never going to be, you know, this really, really thick sauce. You could condense this more, reduce it a lot more, and it could be thicker, but I think this is gonna be a good sauce. So if we had peeled the tomatoes, like I said, we would have a really chunky sauce right now. But as is, with these peels in there, we're gonna take this off the stove and we're going to strain it and make a smooth sauce. I usually prefer a chunky sauce, but this is looking good. You only saw me mix this every time we filmed, but I have been standing over this quite a bit, mixing it, and every time I mix, I have been smashing the sides to just kind of get it all homogeneous and get all of the skin off of the tomatoes as much as I can. So let's bring it on over and strain it. Okay, we're back. We reduced our sauce. It looks really good. We're gonna strain it. I am going to use a tablespoon because I do think that I'll have more like room to push the spoon against the strainer and get as much juice as possible with a spoon. You could use a wooden spoon or anything that's easy for you. So I have a strainer, a bowl, and of course we have our tomato sauce, and I'm just gonna pour it in. You might not pour in, you know, all of it at a time, at the same time. And then all you do is you mix it up. A lot of this will come right through. And then if you do find that this is not thick enough, you can put it back on the stove before you serve it and just reduce it for like 2 or 3 more minutes, and then it'll thicken back up. So I think what I'll do is I'm going to strain most of it, and I'll keep just a little bit, but I don't like the skin in my sauce, and you might not either, so straining is really the best way to avoid all of that. It does take a little bit of time, but not that much. You could also, if you wanted a quicker way around this, you could also just add this directly to a blender and mix it all up. It might be a little bit bitter because the sauce will still have the skin, and the skin has a tendency to give people a little bit of heartburn if they're sensitive to it. So, but you could do that. Okay, so once that's all done, so I have a trash thing down here, so I'm not throwing it onto the floor. I'm just gonna dump it in our compost. It's just easier to keep it on the floor because it's really big. And then I'll add the rest. So in theory, you could probably add croutons to this and make it a soup. For those of you who are interested, you could also use this as a base for stew, but it's going to make a great pasta sauce. If I were at home, I would probably just put this right into a mason jar. If you store this in the refrigerator, you can store this for up to, I would say, 7 days completely worry-free. And then, of course, you can freeze this in your freezer in ice cube trays or small plastic bags that are pre-portioned, so you don't have to waste, you know, all of it to just defrost a little bit and keep it in your freezer for up to 6 months. So it is something that's like super economical to do, especially if you have tomatoes that aren't like really firm enough to put in a salad or in a sandwich and you don't know what to do with them. It's really a great idea to make your own sauce because it has freezing ability, and you can add this to a base of rice when you cook red rice. You can use tomato sauce over pasta. There's just so many things you can do with it, and if it's in your freezer, you always have it and it's always ready to go. So we are pretty much done. All right, so we have a bowl of strained pasta sauce. It takes a long time, but it's not super hard to do. You can do it. If you make this, please let us know how your recipe turned out, and we really hope you enjoyed this video. Surprise! I'm back. So I know that we finished our video, but guess what? I made a mistake. This is really good soup, but I didn't reduce it long enough to really make a sauce. So that said, the directions are the same. The sauce would have turned out amazing if I had reduced it a little bit more. The directions to make tomato soup are the same. We have a really delicious, because we all tasted it, we have a really delicious tomato soup here. But that's the thing about life and cooking is, you know, even when you think you know what you're doing, you can make a mistake. And sometimes even when you've been doing something forever and you keep doing it, sometimes it ends up being wrong too. So everybody that's trying this recipe or anything you're doing in the kitchen or in life for that matter, just be yourself, be relaxed, make mistakes. Sometimes they turn out great because now we have soup, but you do you, and I just wanted to follow up the end of our video to let you know that I didn't make tomato sauce, I made tomato soup. So that's all. I hope you enjoyed your tomato soup if you didn't reduce it enough like I did.